Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The S&P 500 remaining about the 4,500 level. So we are heading to the longest streak of weekly gains since July. You have also derivative contracts tied to stocks and indexes. They're set to mature today. That may add some volatility to the market. And then you have small caps. They're delivering a pretty solid performance. The Russell 2000 right now, that is up 1.3%. Some of the individual movers, you have Applied Materials. That is the worst performing stock in the S&P 500. Actually got this news after the close yesterday. Still sinking, and a report it faces a criminal probe for allegedly violating export restrictions to China. And the home builder stocks, they're getting a boost as new homes construction unexpectedly picked up. Yet housing starts as well as building permits, two of the pieces of economic data that we got this morning, they were both up more than expected. S&P 500 right now is 8 points higher. That is up 0.2%. We are at 4516 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 19 points higher at 34,965. And the NASDAQ 100, the tech-heavy NASDAQ 100, 29 points higher. That is up right now, up 0.2% at 15,861. As far as treasuries, the benchmark two-year yield, well, the two-year yield, I should say, which is more policy reactive, 5 basis points higher. That is at 489. The 10-year is the benchmark. That's unchanged right now. That is at 442. And the long bond, 3 basis points lower. That comes in at a rate of 458. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We're watching gas prices, as we're known to do ahead of a big holiday period like this, of course. And, you know, the whole situation with crude has been one to watch, with enormous political implications, of course, as well. Crude today, at least WTI, West Texas Intermediate, up just about 4%. We're at $75.88 right now, closer to $76 a barrel here, with big questions about gas prices. This is really what we're getting to here. And we're going to talk to Patrick DeHaan in just a moment about where we're going with gas prices this holiday week ahead and going into the wintertime. Of course, it's not just gas, it's heating oil, particularly for homes and families living in the Northeast that are directly impacted by crude oil prices. Natural gas is a whole other. The national average, by the way, just to set the baseline, is 333. But of course, it depends on where you live. In New York, you're a little higher than that at 362. You're still in another universe in California. And this is an East Coaster talking. Imagine rolling up to the pump with $5 a gallon. That is what they are dealing with. They're above 4 in Oregon and Washington. They're above 4 in Nevada. What does it cost to tank up an F1 car, by the way? They put $500 million into that whole thing. I can only imagine. You tank up the Ferrari, you go out, you see this thing on the track. They hit a manhole last night, a flaming ball going down the strip. That's a whole other story. I digress. Looking around the country, it gets a lot cheaper than that, too. They're paying $2.80 in Texas. $2.80 in Georgia. It's about $3 right now in Michigan, where we're crossing the country here. And, of course, different political implications in each state. Patrick DeHaan does this for a living. You've heard him before on Sound On, and he's with us again now, the head of petroleum analysis at Gas Buddy. It's great to have you, Patrick. Welcome back as we talk again ahead of another holiday weekend. Looking at crude, as I mentioned, WTI near $76 a gallon and a national average at $333. What's it going to look like once we really get into the throes of wintertime?
Well, I think we'll continue to moderate here. We've seen a lot of downward pressure in the last 4 weeks on WTI prices. So that's translated to certainly cheaper gasoline prices. We're also in the midst of seasonality. Americans simply not driving as much. even though they're on the doorstep of Thanksgiving, Americans really toning down their gasoline consumption. That's put a lot of downward pressure on prices as well. In addition, refineries wrapping up their maintenance, and they're going to have to find a place to put all that gasoline. And all of that coupled together with less risk from the Middle East has certainly caused an 8-week drop in the price of gasoline. The national average now at $3.31 a gallon. That's the lowest tally since February. So just in time for a driving holiday, we're greeted with some of the lowest prices in months.
Sounds counterintuitive, I have to admit, when I hear references to less risk in the Middle East. I know there was a great concern about a second front, that this might expand into something involving Iran if it isn't already on a proxy level here. But is it just a matter of expectations? Because we've still got a hot war going in Gaza.
Yeah, it is. It's managing expectations. There is also less risk in this area. Israel, obviously not a major oil producer, but as you mentioned, this is more of a risk about Iran. And certainly Iran has even suggested in recent weeks to Hamas that it's not going to get involved in this. So that further reduces the amount of risk. Of course, something could change, but all of this, the takeaway is really that this is not impacting or slowing down the flows of crude oil out of the Middle East. And that's why oil prices, initially there was a little bit of risk, but this never really affected gas prices. It could not overpower the seasonality. That, by the way, will continue. And now with crude at $76 a barrel, though it's up today, I still think there's a pretty good shot that we could retest the lows that we saw last winter when the national average bottomed out at $3.05 a gallon.
And that's an economic indicator, right? That's a cooling economy, which would be consistent with a lot of the data we're seeing. There's really fewer as reliable, though, as the price of gas.
Yeah, certainly the price of gasoline, an economic barometer. And of course, the price of gas is contingent on gasoline consumption, and that's been weakening. So certainly some signals from consumption, which GasBuddy's latest estimate last week, the U.S. consumed 8.46 million barrels. I know the EIA data was quite a bit higher, almost a midsummer print, but our data is suggestive of a consumer that's a bit reluctant to fill up at the same pace they did even weeks prior. So certainly not a positive sign on the economy, but Americans feeling the lower prices. 60,000 stations now across the United States with gasoline under $3, 12 states under $3. So a lot more Americans looking at the pump and feeling a little bit more normal, though it may not boost their holiday spending.
You sound optimistic. As we spend time with Patrick DeHunt from GasBuddy, we keep asking the White House about refilling the SPR. And when you see $75 a barrel, we're getting back into that range that the Energy Department said it was comfortable with. Are we about to see a lot more bids? Because I know it's not as simple as just going in the market and buying these barrels. Or is this just something that's going to take a generation because so much has been used?
I mean, I'd really be hoping with the moves that the Department of Energy and the White House has been making in preparation to fill this, that now that the strike price, was hit, $79 a barrel was the price that the DOE clearly outlined. I'd be hoping that they were active in the market. Now, they did just announce last week a 1.6 million barrel buyback, but that's, as we know, that's a needle in the haystack kind of amount. So they really need to ramp up. And as long as the price of WTI has remained below $79, I really hope that the government's in a position to buy back at these prices, considering the average selling price, last year was $95 a barrel.
When we consider folks heating their homes this winter, what's the gap going to look like between those who use heating oil and those who use natural gas?
Well, natural gas has come down far more than what we've seen for heating oil, and simply because in light of the Russia war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of increase in natural gas production. And we benefited last year from a warmer than expected winter as well. We just did not see withdrawals from natural gas reserves as significant. And so we came out of winter above average, and now natural gas inventories have continued to run well above average. And so that's put a lot of downward pressure on natural gas prices. But home heating oil is subject to the refining constraints that we've been dealing with the last few years. And they aren't completely resolved. I mean, more refining capacities come online, but all it would take is one, extended period, a couple of weeks of bone-chilling temperatures in the Northeast for those home heating oil prices to shoot up to potentially $4.50 or $5 a gallon again.
Well, you just answered my next question then. So is this the year to cut up the oil tank again, get rid of it, and go to natural gas?
Well, I think now more than ever, I do expect home heating oil prices to be lower than last year. But to your point, there's probably never been a better time, more cost savings associated with making the jump over to natural gas. And that's what we've been seeing in recent years. So I'm sure that's a trend that will continue.
Patrick, it's good to have you. I don't know if you're driving. Does someone in your business actually get in the car around Thanksgiving, or is that the reason why you do not?
I was out scouting prices just a couple hours ago. I've been making the rounds and, pleasantly surprised. But I'll be staying home for Thanksgiving. And, I was talking to some other folks as well that, a lot of us seem to be staying closer to home. And Gas Buddy's survey found that a lot of Americans, 41% are hitting the road, but that means a lot of them aren't.
Wait, you're really driving around scouting gas prices? You don't have some way to get these prices in another way?
I was scouting prices as I was running around to get ready for Thanksgiving next week.
I guess you can't help yourself. I love the image of Patrick.
I can't. I have to
going
report
gas
those
station
prices,
to gas station. Well, absolutely.
Exactly.
You're firsthand reporting. It's good to have you, Patrick. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a safe holiday. Come back and see us again soon. The head of petroleum analysis at gasbuddy.com. I picture him like Henry Hill driving around, looking up out of the windshield. It's not a helicopter, Patrick. All right, let's, I digress, get you up to date on the news here. Leslie Lotto has that for us, world and national news in the Bloomberg newsroom in New York. Hi, Leslie.
Hey, Joe, the Israel-Hamas war is now on day 42. Israel reportedly close to dismantling the military system, it says, in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and its forces will start focusing on the southern part. Israeli forces searching several hospitals this week and say that they found tunnels and weapons in some of them. It all comes after the body of a hostage was found in a building close to Gaza's main hospital. It's also as a deal between Israel and Hamas to free 50 hostages for the return of Palestinian prisoners is reportedly in the works. The Department of Education's opened investigations into schools over allegations of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, that is. Islamophobia is the word I'm looking for. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
One school district and 6 colleges are under investigation as part of a government effort to address a rise in reports of discrimination on campuses. The affected colleges are Cornell University, Columbia University, the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in New York, Wellesley College in Massachusetts, and the University of Pennsylvania and Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. The Mays Unified School District in Kansas is also under investigation. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
A looming volcano eruption in Iceland has residents on edge.
I'm very scared, and I don't know what is going to happen. My house and everything. I've lived in my house for 40 years.
Crack in the earth began to spread through a small Icelandic town of Grindavik, and hundreds of earthquakes have been recorded. All 3,800 residents have been forced to evacuate. The head of Iceland's emergency management says it's very shallow depth magma. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it on Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto.
stocks, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The S&P 500 trading above the 4,500 mark, on pace for its third straight week of gains. This would be the longest run since July 6th. 6 of the major industry groups in the index, they're higher right now. 5 are lower. You have energy in the lead as oil prices rise. The biggest drag right now coming from communication services, and that's where you're going to find shares of Alphabet. They're down 1.5%. Steve Cheveron at Federated Global Investment is looking for stocks to rally even further.
We're getting that Fed pause rally, and that can be powerful. Historically, those are 9-month events, and you can see the equity market up 15, 20%. And interestingly enough, and this is something that's been on our mind, the equity market has hit an all-time high each of the last 5 times that the Fed has paused.
Right now, the S&P 500, 6 points higher. That's up 0.1%. 45.13 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average right now down, well, let's call it dead flat. 34,945 on the index. And the NASDAQ 100, 13 points higher at 15,846. Finally, fallout from Elon Musk's post endorsing anti-Semitic views, that continues to spread. Just getting word, according to Axios, Apple will pause advertising on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden wrapping up his involvement at the APEC summit out in San Francisco today before he heads home to Delaware for the weekend. It wasn't just the meeting with President Xi. In fact, he met today with AMLO, the Mexican president here, sending a message and acknowledging the challenges posed at the border, of course, bringing us back to one of the very important deals, the important takeaways from President Biden's meeting with President Xi, and that was one on counter-narcotics dealing with fentanyl. We may have spent a little more time obsessing over the dictator remark than we should have the takeaways. Not that there were that many, but expectations were so low for this meeting that a lot of folks were surprised with what we learned when the president emerged in his news conference the other night. It's where we begin our conversation with our friend David Weston, who joins from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. David, it's great to see you here. I know that you talked about China today with Larry Summers, and we're always curious when the former Treasury Secretary weighs in, and what's just become a series of fascinating conversations between the two of you here. And the big question, I guess, is did President Biden move the needle here? Are we moving back to a more productive relationship, or was this just a meeting so we could meet again?
Well, you talk about takeaways from the meeting. Maybe the main takeaway is that it happened at all, because it's been a while since they've actually met. And, you know, we talked to Larry pretty much every week about macroeconomics issues. And we had CPI numbers. We had a lot of things to talk about this week. But when I talked to him, he said, I really want to start off with President Biden meeting with President Xi, because he actually sees some connection potentially between some of the economic issues that President Xi's having and some of the geopolitical strife as well. And this was Larry's take on what happened.
There are very profound geopolitical forces at play, and this struggle is going to be with us for a very long time. So I'm glad to see the meeting, but I'm concerned, and I'm particularly concerned in light of the gravity of the economic challenges that China is facing. And my concern is that, as with the Soviet Union in the 1960s, a sense of very serious economic challenges is going to drive a felt need for increasing assertiveness in the international arena.
So, Joe, you heard the analogy, possible analogy to Soviet Union in the 60s, because sometimes when regimes, if I can put it that way, I won't talk about the dictator or not, but the regime in China comes under real domestic strife. Sometimes one way to change the attention is to sort of geopolitical activity, and that's what he was concerned about. Right. And so Larry thought it was important that at least they met, they were civil to one another, they had a couple of things that specifics they talked about, but at least that's a step in the right direction.
we frequently ask you about politics, David, because it's the nature of the program. But from your perch at Bloomberg Wall Street Week, where is Wall Street with China? We heard from Alibaba, another meltdown this week. JD, there are so many of them that investors have just turned away from. They're looked at as poison in many cases. What would it take for that to change?
I don't want to be flip, but one of the reactions I get is it's sort of like China. You can't live with it. You can't live without it. It's too big an economy for major players in the financial sphere to ignore China. It's the second largest economy. You have to deal with it. At the same time, there are real risks, as we know, in part because President Xi in the past has been, I would say, somewhat mercurial in the way he's dealt with, for example, tech or private tutoring services. Now, you know very well, Joe, that this week out in San Francisco, President Xi went out of his way to say, no, we're going to be friendly to investors again. We really want you in. He had that big 300-person dinner with the CEOs. He got a standing ovation. Right. So he certainly is courting the investors. The question is, are people going to feel comfortable jumping back in that pool at this point?
Well, you know, as soon as you think you've got the progress, you get a story like this. By the way, I just assumed you were in that meeting with him because it's David Weston. So. Applied Materials, the biggest chip equipment maker up in Massachusetts, gets a knock on the door from the authorities. Apparently, one of their chip-making units found its way to China and got to SMIC, which broke the United States export rules by getting that technology to make the phone, for instance, that's now competing with Apple. They've zeroed this in on Applied Materials, David. The Justice Department is in fact now reportedly probing the company and how this actually happened. Our government is not fooling around when it comes to controlling technology like this, is it?
No, and in fairness to our government, they've made no bones about it. I mean, they've been very upfront. Everybody who's spoken about it has said there's a national security aspect to this, not just a trade issue, not just an economics issue. It's a national security issue. They're taking it very seriously. And particularly as we move forward to the next generation of generative AI and some of the synthetic biology, I think this is just going to ramp up more and more as it's perceived, at least in some of these areas, maybe not all, some of these areas, the United States is ahead of China, and we're not particularly interested in helping them catch up with us. So I would expect, Joe, I don't know, but I expect we're going to see more of this rather than less.
Yeah, hearing Sundar Pichai yesterday on Bloomberg suggest that China would help lead the way on AI was fascinating, considering what he's up to at his company. David Weston is with us here on Bloomberg Sound On, and we've come full circle on this UAW story, David. I don't think we've missed a week talking to you about this. It's in your wheelhouse of expertise, and we saw all three of the big three actually ratified here. So now the question becomes, who's next? And I wonder if you're looking within the auto sector, if it's a Toyota or a Tesla or something I'm not thinking of yet.
You know, first of all, Mary Barra must be breathing a sigh of relief, right? Because on Thursday, there were reports that maybe GM would reject it. They affirmed it, I think, by a 55% vote, so she made it through. That's good. And it matters, of course, to Sean Fain, who leads the UAW, how it proceeds with Toyota, with Honda, with Tesla. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it matters as much to the workers, because you saw we immediately had a wage increase, right, from the non-union sources. So to some extent, from the workers' point of view, if they're getting the raises anyway, how much does it matter? But there will be, I think, something of a competition here for the workers to say, you don't need a union because we'll take care of you anyway. It'll be interesting, but it certainly will increase the wages, I think, of auto workers.
That's exactly what the White House wants to hear. Could Sean Fain run for office?
Well, listen, I wouldn't underestimate the man at this point. I mean, when he first showed up, I must say I had a little skepticism. He'd never done this before. As you know, he was an outside candidate, really almost an accidental president in the sense that they had such scandals with really corruption at the head of the UAW. He came in, and boy, looking at it from a distance, I thought it was pretty cleverly handled, the way he did it. I mean, they'd never gone against all three at the same time. They had sort of a rolling targeting, hitting of different factors of different companies, and it sure seemed to have worked, at least as far as I can tell. So I wouldn't rule anything out right now.
He seems like a master communicator, David. My goodness, imagine this guy on the trail. He could be dangerous.
Yeah, and he uses social media very effectively, right?
Absolutely. Facebook Live all the way to the election.
Exactly.
David, it's great to see you. I guess I should wish you a happy Thanksgiving now if I don't see you before then. Have a great
If not,
holiday.
happy Thanksgiving to you. Thanks for having me.
As always, to Wall Street Week tonight, 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg TV and radio with our friend David Weston. Always a pleasure. We talk to David every week at this time to get a sense of what's coming up and give you a little sneak preview on what you might have learned from some of these great conversations that you're only going to hear and see, on Bloomberg. It's the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew. Yeah, this is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker from Bloomberg World Headquarters. Fallout from Elon Musk's post endorsing anti-Semitic views, that is continuing to spread today. And now, according to Axios, Apple is going to pause advertising on X, of course, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Earlier, we heard that Lionsgate Entertainment also has suspended all advertising on X, effective immediately. That post by Musk has also prompted a rebuke from the White House and criticism from plenty of Tesla investors. Alexa, find me a new job. Amazon cutting hundreds of employees in the division responsible for the voice-activated Alexa assistant. That's according to a memo that was sent to employees today that Bloomberg got a look at. Daniel Roush, an Amazon vice president who leads the team working on Alexa in the company's Fire TV streaming franchise, says the company is shifting some of the efforts to better align with our business priorities, including focusing on business capabilities powered by generative artificial intelligence. And the criminal ransomware gang behind the recent attack on Industrial Commercial Bank of China has claimed responsibility for 2 more hacks on U.S. financial firms. The Lockbit gang added the Chicago Trading Company and Alphadyne Asset Management this week to a list of victims on its dark web page. Well, the gang has given them deadlines to make an unspecified payment. They're threatening to publish stolen data online if the demands aren't met. Those are some of the stories that we're following at this hour. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We're live from Washington, where we try to keep you up to date on the regular. Let's do it right now from New York, of course, at World Headquarters, where we find Leslie Lotto in the Bloomberg newsroom. World and national news now. Leslie, what do we have?
Yeah, Joe, every day, hundreds of rescuers in Gaza who don't have proper equipment to search for the living, let alone the dead, claw through tons of rubble with shovels and iron bars and their bare hands. They're looking for the bodies of their loved ones killed in Israeli missile strikes more than 5 weeks into Israel's war against Hamas. Some streets now more like graveyards. UN humanitarian monitors say at least 2,700 people, including 1,500 children, are missing and believed to be buried under that rubble. More than 11,400 are dead. The judge in Donald Trump's Georgia election interference case is issuing a protective order for evidence following a media leak. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee issued an order barring the release of sensitive evidence exchanged by lawyers ahead of the trial against Trump and his co-defendants. The Fulton County DA's office requested the order after interviews of co-defendants Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell were released. Trump and several other defendants are charged with crimes related to their alleged efforts to overturn President Biden's election win in Georgia. Meanwhile, audio's been released from a new book from ABC News' chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl, who interviewed Trump about January 6th, among other things.
I wanted to go back. I was thinking about going back during the problem to stop the problem, doing it myself. Secret Service didn't like that idea too much.
Carl's book, Tired of Winning, is his third on 45. And a child killer's been put to death in Texas. David Rentario kidnapped and murdered a 5-year-old girl who he took from an El Paso Walmart. And when her family was Christmas shopping, it happened back in 2001. And then he apparently set her body on fire. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto, and this is Bloomberg. Back to you, Joe.
All right, Leslie, thank you. You, of course, would have known everything Leslie told you already if you came to work with the app this morning, and it's my opportunity to remind you of the coolest thing we have going here. Because, look, we all live in the car, we live on the train, whatever, but this is for those who stare at the dashboard on the way to work and home. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, life-changing here. It gives you access, if you get the app here, this is, again, as I mentioned, the Bloomberg Business app. Download the new one, and you'll get access to all the podcasts, all the live shows, including this one, and even audio forms of the stories on the terminal, right? So you don't have to sort of prop up the phone on the wheel and pretend to not be reading as you're careening down the highway. We'll read it for you. Get the latest headlines whenever you want them, of course, from Bloomberg News Now. And it's all presented by our sponsor, Interactive Brokers, which is why it's free with the latest version of the Bloomberg Business app. So get it on your phone in the App Store, the Apple App Store, Google Play, whatever your thing is. If you're a CarPlay or an Android type, that's up to you because we've got them both covered. Just download the app, connect the phone to the car, get started now, and, we'll ride to work together. It's a pretty cool thing, as a matter of fact. Like I said, every Bloomberg podcast, including Sound On, the live shows, including Sound On, audio form of the print stories, all coming your way, of course. Latest headlines at the click of a button with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for spending some time with us today. I'll meet you back here on Balance of Power, or should I say there, on Bloomberg TV, starting at 5 p.m. Washington time. We're going to dig into the economic outlook with Mark Zandi, the chief economist at Moody's Analytics. And we'll spend some time with Nick Ackerman. Yeah, the former Watergate prosecutor, Nick Ackerman, is going to talk to us about the legal troubles facing Donald Trump, which are not getting any easier. Our signature panel will be back as well. Rick and Jeannie join us every Friday, not only on Sound On, but on Balance of Power, and I hope I'll see you then. Have a great weekend otherwise. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast if you showed up late. And again, we'll check you out at 5 o'clock on Balance of Power. It's time to go back to New York. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. It is Friday, November 17th, the end of the last full week before Thanksgiving. I'm Scarlett Fu, along with my co-host Bailey Lipschultz. Carol and Tim taking some time off, much-deserved time off. Bailey, great to speak with you here.
Fun times. I'm excited, Scarlett. Could not be more stoked.
Could not be more stoked, but when you look at the market action, not a lot to get stoked over.
A lot of quietness going into the shortened holiday trading window next week, but it does seem like we are on pace for yet another week in the green after that good inflation data.
Yeah, inflation data that seems to put to rest any idea that the Fed would raise rates again or even next year. Let's take a look at what's going on in terms of the other top stories. We'll come back to the markets certainly, but some investors, Bailey, in Tesla are kind of fed up with Elon Musk, apparently. They're fed up with his offensive anti-Semitic posts on X, formerly Twitter. Of course, we're going to talk about that shortly, but it's interesting that they're pushing back. I don't know how much they can actually do about it.
Yeah, that's the real question I have, Scarlett, is this is such a big company. Elon Musk, the largest shareholder, such a big driver behind this company and the excitement around it. What can you actually do, especially because it is in the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, so it's a benchmark player, It's an index stock, and he is the icon.
He is the icon, and like it or not, everyone pays attention to what he says, although according to Axios, Apple is the latest company to now say that it's going to pull its advertising off of the X platform. Another story I'm really excited about is Ken Griffin and the boosters of South Florida calling, Miami, that region, Wall Street South. We're going to get more on that in terms of what the city needs to do, what the region needs to do if it really is going to become a financial center.
Are you a fan of Florida?
I'm not really. Yeah. Can I say that out loud?
Me neither.
Being in New York? Okay. We can bond over that shortly. And then, of course, APEC has wrapped up the high-stakes presidential summit. Was it a success, Bailey?
It seemed that way. It seemed like all the messaging was positive especially around that CEO, President Xi dinner. It seemed like the reception had been very strong and a lot of signaling around some of the uncertainty, especially in that APEC region. Seems like it's at least now turned back just a little bit.
Yeah, there was applause when President Biden talked about the resumption of military-to-military communication as well. So Andy Brown, a partner at Brunswick Group, who attended the APEC conference in San Francisco, longtime China watcher, will be joining us. We'll get his take on the successes. And of course, another big success is Pandas will be back in U.S. zoos soon, too. All right, all this to come. First up, let's bring in our TV colleagues, Romaine Bostick and Katie Greifeld. Bloomberg's Countdown to the Close starts right now.
Starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostic alongside Katie Greifeld. We're joined right now by our colleagues Scarlett Fu and Bailey Lipschultz. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, originals, and our partnership. Carol Massar, of those folks still streaming on YouTube. What did you do, Scarlett Fu, with Carol Massar?
Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic are on a forced holiday somewhere. They're taking some time off.
Together?
I don't know. We'll have to find out from them come next week, but I'm guessing no.
I was taking a look at the market, Scarlett, and I was looking at all those big Magnificent Seven stocks. They're all kind of on the back foot on the day, and that includes, I think, everybody's favorite this year, at least on a percentage basis, and that's NVIDIA.
Yeah, and NVIDIA, of course, is going to be reporting earnings next week. It's not until Tuesday, but it's never too early to look ahead to what those results might bring because, Bailey, the numbers that they've posted in the last 2 quarters, they smashed analyst estimates.
Yeah, they beat expectations, but even this last quarter, we saw a huge beat on revenue by more than 20%, but the stock ended up flat. So when you're the best performer and adding more than $800 million in market cap this year, expectations will be sky high, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in a holiday-shortened week.
Yeah, I wonder, though, I mean, we talk about the earnings and when they come out. Is this really a fundamental story? Is this really about the numbers, or is this more so about Jensen Huang and the narrative that he's pieced together for this stock?
Yeah, it remains to be seen how that goes over. I do wonder how many times we're going to say holiday shortened week next week, because I would imagine it's a lot. But let's switch.
Are you against Thanksgiving?
I'm not against it necessarily, but I see it in print all the time. But let's talk about the housing market as well. There was a really interesting story out in Bloomberg Business Week that found that almost 40% of U.S. homeowners right now own their homes outright as of 2022, looking at the latest data. So the share of Americans who are actually living mortgage-free right now, that's an all-time high. It's really interesting, and it speaks more to the fact that many of these are baby boomers who refinanced when rates were super low, and now they just own their home.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, what's the demographic of that here? And I guess that's a good thing. And we've talked about this a lot as to why we haven't actually seen a collapse in the housing market given the big rise in rates. And look, that if you own a house or if you bought one over the last 20 years or so, either you own it outright or you've got a mortgage rate that is probably most likely below 5%.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, though, that a lot of people wanted to pay down their mortgage, even if they did have lower mortgage rates. A lot of people want to hold on to those mortgages because of the mortgage interest deduction for their taxes. But, the peace of mind is good, I suppose.
Yeah, and the other thing, Scarlett, too, is like, I mean, don't they always, financial advisors always tell you that usually your mortgage is probably usually the lowest cost thing you have in terms of borrowing relative to credit cards and cars and other things like that. So they always say that's the one you should pay down last, right? Because I mean, if you're sitting on 3% rate, and if you got a credit card that's in the double digits, you would pay that down first before the mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for those who are capable of doing it, who have the means, spare a thought for the millennials who are not in that kind of position.
Thank you, Scarlett. I appreciate that. I was going to say this is all Greek to me because I don't have a mortgage. I pretty much famously at this point, because Romaine keeps bringing it up, it was in the housing market, and rates are just too high. You do the monthly calculation and it's just too high, and I think that's the story for a lot of people trying to buy right now. Sellers aren't happy and buyers certainly aren't happy, Bailey.
Yeah, Katie, as someone who just closed and has made, I think, 2 mortgage payments myself.
Wow, congratulations.
It is a high interest rate environment, and one thing that does stand out to me and is an interesting thing is the number of people selling houses in expensive areas, think California, out here in New York, New Jersey, and moving to the areas like Texas and Florida, just given the percentage of new homes that are being sold and paid up front.
Yeah, to lower cost areas as well, not just where homes are cheaper, but where the cost of living is a lot lower too. All right, guys, that does it for now. We're going to catch back up with you in about 40 minutes time before we count you down to the close. We'll be back together live on television, on radio, and on YouTube, and on Bloomberg Originals. At 4 p.m., our Beyond the Bell coverage begins when we take you through today's market close. Bouncing in the club with the heat. At the Citadel Securities Global Macro Conference in Miami. Take a listen to what he said.
New York is the financial capital of America today, and it's New York's to lose. Now, having said that, Miami, I think, represents the future of America.
So he's referring to Wall Street South, Bailey, the idea that South Florida is the up-and-coming financial center. They've been promoting this idea for years. It's definitely gained some traction since the pandemic.
Yeah, we saw a lot of people wanting more tax-friendly states. Obviously, it's easy to talk your book when you're someone who's made the move down there. So it does stand out, and interesting that he said it's where the future is, and they're trying to court more and more. I know a number of traders that did move down, and so far haven't complained, but I tell them often, let's talk more in August.
All right, well, let's bring in Jonathan Levin. He is a markets columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. He is based in Miami. And Jonathan, you've lived in Miami for a while. Have you talked to the finance guys who've made their way down? What are they saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, for starters, if you're coming from New York City, you get here and you immediately say, hey, this is a pretty good deal, right? I don't have to deal with Northeast winters. For starters, I'm not paying a state income tax. And while Miami has gotten to be a pretty pricey place, especially recently, it's still less expensive, let's face it, than, trying to live in Manhattan or even San Francisco, right? So you get here and you get this sense of like euphoria for the first couple of months, maybe even the first few years that people get here.
Yeah, and I'm more interested in kind of what those steps look like, though, for it to look more like a New York and actually be this future hub that Ken Griffin and many others enjoy talking about.
Sure, absolutely. So, point of my column today is that Miami really needs to develop into a more mature place if it is going to really compete with these major financial centers, right? So for starters, we are a car town. You can't get anywhere without a car in South Florida. We do not really have a viable public transit system. It's nothing like New York in that regard, right? So 40 years ago they put up this metro rail. It basically only works for like 3 or 4% of the population. It's just not a very comprehensive public transit system. And so, one of my big recommendations in my column today is if you really want to compete and have a future as Wall Street South, you have to do something about that. You have to do something about this traffic that is just getting worse and worse. And it's a huge undertaking to say, let's go out there and build this massive new rail system. I don't think that that's practical. I don't think that that's going to happen. But as development officials look at the future, they have to be looking at creating more walkable neighborhoods going forward, and maybe even, doing something with Miami's water. Where are the ferries? Where are the water taxis? Anything to get people out of those cars.
I love that idea, and that would make it really picturesque and just give it a new character. Speaking of water, Jonathan, the area is highly prone to flooding, and of course it's in a hurricane zone as well. So climate resiliency is obviously a really big issue. From what you've seen, is South Florida's local governments doing enough? What more should they be doing?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, if you talk about really bringing in serious businesses like another Citadel, you have to give them the confidence that, if they're investing for the future, their investments are going to pay off over decades. And nobody wants to think about the possibility that the lobby of their beautiful new building is going to be flooding on a regular basis, right? So I've seen some of these governments making the right overtures. City of Miami did a big climate resiliency bond some time ago. They're making sort of investments in pumps and these sorts of things. The point I make is you've just got to do more and more of it. Investing for the long term is really about elevate with that infrastructure. And on the private side, you've also got to be out there and putting in the most rigorous codes possible so that private businesses and private homes are essentially turning themselves into bunkers for the future climate challenges that sort of inevitably this region is going to face.
And one of the things I'm reminded of a story back in September about the cost to insure homes. Is that something, Jonathan, that comes up and is being considered, just given the cost of living can be cheaper in some regards, but if you're spending a much higher premium to insure your house or your car, does that balance out?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a huge point. I mean, look, the past few years have been especially bad for the property insurance segment here in South Florida, and I think it's a confluence of factors. It is absolutely partially about the climate challenges that this region is facing. On top of that, we have a runaway litigation issue in the state of Florida. There have been some reforms that have tried to tackle that. And, let's face it, I think that the dynamics in fixed income markets have also played into the price hikes that we've seen trickle down to property insurance rates. So the bottom line is property insurance inflation has been through the roof here in the state of Florida. And it absolutely, it makes it harder both for those Wall Street South migrants, but it makes it harder too for workers who are sort of Wall Street South adjacent, right? So if I could just pivot to sort of the third pillar of where Florida needs to see improvement to keep its momentum going, it's really education. And that all comes down to drawing the best teachers to the region. Whether it's for private schools or public schools, you need to bring in more and more teachers. We don't have great student-teacher ratios here, and you're not going to bring in more great teachers if people can't afford to live here, because there is both housing inflation and insurance inflation. And by the way, as I started with, not great public transit options for those people who choose to live out in those suburbs and exurbs. So very difficult cocktail of factors here.
Absolutely. I mean, if you want to keep the talent, you have to make it easy for the talent to bring over their entire families, to uproot them from the Northeast, where there's no shortage of high-priced private schools that have a short list of getting into the Harvards and the Yales. You had something really interesting in your column that looked at the private schools and how many of them have good SAT scores in the Miami area versus New York, and the contrast is stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the story is, I live down here. I try to defend the area, and I think there are a lot of very good private and public schools down here. But the truth of the matter is there aren't a ton of great schools. And the way, we measured great high schools with the help of this consulting firm, Webster Pacific, is like how many of them produce average SAT scores above 1,400? The answer very quickly is 2, right? So you can imagine if you have a big flood of folks coming in and they're managing directors, they're top folks at hedge funds, they all want to get their kids into these 2 schools. And those 2 schools, Pinecrest and Ransom Everglades, for what it's worth, they can only expand so fast. You understand where they're coming from. They don't want to expand so fast that they risk their reputation, that they risk the quality of the education. And also, expanding means acquiring more real estate. We've talked about why and how that's difficult in a place like this. So again, just very challenging. If you're up in Manhattan, you feel like you have dozens of options, or at least a couple dozen of very, very elite private schools. Here, the options are few and far between. And by the way, one of them is probably as much as an hour or more from downtown Miami. So good luck with that commute.
Exactly. Jonathan Levin, thank you so much for joining us. Jonathan Levin is a Bloomberg opinion columnist joining us from Miami. And Bailey, we were talking earlier about how we may not necessarily be Florida fans, but these are issues that folks in the finance industry think about constantly: education, transportation, and ease of transit, especially.
Yeah, I'm not an Ivy League grad, but I do know that Ivy League grads prefer to get their kids set up to go to an Ivy League. And as Jonathan mentioned, that's one of those key factors for drawing the true elites down there.
All right. Well, South Florida still has its boosters, and of course, there is plenty of money moving down there. Just it continues to be a challenge for those who are considering making the move.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. As we head to the close, not a lot of movement in the major averages. The real action, I'll say, is with the small caps. The Russell 2000 right now, that is up 1.3%. The S&P 500 trading about 4,500. So that's on pace for its third straight week of gains. This is the longest run since July. Right now, the S&P 500, 7 points higher, up 0.2%, 45.15 on the index. Best performing industry group right now, that's energy, as crude oil prices try to rebound. Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 15 points right now. The NASDAQ 100 up 16 points. Alexa, find me a new job. Amazon cutting hundreds of employees in the division that's responsible for its voice-activated Alexa assistant. This is according to a memo that was sent to workers today. Daniel Roush, an Amazon vice president, leads teams working on Alexa and the company's Fire TV streaming franchise, said the company was shifting some of our efforts to better align with our business priorities. When they send you a memo saying they're going to shift their priorities to better align their business priorities, it's probably time to worry. Anyway, that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. How you guys holding up?
We're holding up. Yeah, it's a pretty big shoes to fill.
You sound
John.
like you have a cold.
I do a little bit.
And the fact that it's absolute zero in the studio, I'm going to guess that's not helping things.
Not helping at all.
But it's good for the equipment, they tell me.
That's what they say. And it's like 70 degrees outside, or at least it felt that way this morning.
I know, very bizarre. Late November and 66 degrees outside. What's up with that?
It'll end up being like 45 next week.
It was like a spring walk coming into work this morning. It was delightful.
Did you take the ferry?
I took the ferry from New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, into Midtown Manhattan, and it was absolutely delightful. And I can tell you, this back to office thing, it ain't working because there was nobody on board. I mean, it was just, I was like by myself.
I had my pickup parking spots today when I went to park in the garage.
Down here?
No, at the Metro North station.
Oh, yeah. I take the bus in the morning, and on Fridays they run in adjusted schedule, which makes it more difficult, but even less crowded.
You take a car, I take a beautiful ferry, Bailey comes in on a bus.
On a bus.
Sorry.
Bailey's a man of the people.
Yeah, that's it.
John Tucker, we'll check in with you later on. Thank you so much. Bailey, this is one of the most read stories. Of course, it has to do with Elon Musk because it always has to do with Elon Musk, right? The White House condemning Musk for boosting anti-Semitic posts on X. They called his comments unacceptable and harmful given the spike in anti-Semitic incidents following the October 7th massacre by Hamas of 1,200 Israelis. And remember, Musk's companies hold several government contracts. So let's put this all into perspective and bring in Max Chafkin. He is a columnist for Bloomberg Businessweek magazine. Max has spent many, many hours thinking about and writing on Elon Musk. Max, is any of this surprising to you?
Well, I think what's surprising, a couple of things. One is Elon Musk, of course, is known for edgy behavior online, right? That's nothing new. Anyone who followed the, funding secured brouhaha of 5 years ago knows that. Since acquiring Twitter, renaming it X, he has verged into, I'd say, hard right, kind of ultra conservative territory. And before this week had made some cracks that were kind of pretty close to anti-Semitic or like playing with anti-Semitic tropes. But what changed this week was, an explicit embrace of an anti-Semitic theory. And so I mean, it is surprising, as you said. I mean, he's the wealthiest man in the world. He runs the largest car company. He runs a major defense contractor. I mean, needless to say, not behavior you expect out of somebody of that stature.
And Max, what's interesting to me is X now a private company. You have IBM, you have Lionsgate suspending their advertisements on the platform. What can investors or just general companies really do to hit back at Musk, given his stature and given his prominence in a range of companies?
So we talked about this last night on the Elon Inc. podcast. We did an emergency episode to discuss this. And, the thing is, this company X, Twitter, has spent months basically doing damage control over Elon Musk's posts, right? Elon Musk had this kind of much touted meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, where he, the leader of Israel, where he deplored, he condemned anti-Semitism. He's done a bunch of interviews where he's sort of attempted to essentially like clean up the damage. We've even seen Linda Yaccarino say stuff, including yesterday. But of course, it kind of undermines the effort that this company is making when the boss is also the one tweeting the hate speech. And so as a result, right, this is very bad for X Twitter's business. They were already losing advertisers, even without the kind of edgy or even racist behavior of the CEO. There were questions about this company's long-term viability. And now seeing Apple, IBM, Lionsgate, and you have to think that more may come. That is going to make that position even trickier. Now, as you said, it's a private company, right? Musk can go on losing as much money as he wants, but it does owe, huge amounts of money to investors. That could be at play. And I think the really more interesting question is, what does this do to demand for Tesla?
No, that's a really great point. And by the way, I just wanted to do a shameless plug here because, Max, you mentioned the Elon Inc. Emergency podcast. You can listen and subscribe to Elon Inc. on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and, of course, the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm glad you mentioned that, of course, Tesla and the connection there, because Tesla shares were moving on all these headlines related to Elon Musk. And it's worth noting that Tesla margins are declining. Tesla is trying to do what it can to boost sales. Revenue at X is also plummeting. SpaceX has had some kind of negative headlines. They're going to launch their deep space Starship rocket system this weekend, but 7 months ago, they had their first major test flight end explosively in midair. Is Elon Musk frustrated and this is how it's coming out? Is that maybe part of the story?
I don't know. I think, first of all, number one, I think it's sort of dangerous to try to start coming up with excuses for, racist behavior. I don't know if he's frustrated or not. There's certainly reasons, I suppose, for him to feel frustrated. What I think is, there have been challenges to Tesla all this year, and it's been unclear how much of those are connected to sort of broader economic issues, right? Interest rates going up, very bad for car companies because a lot of people finance their cars. So that could potentially hit demand. There are these competitive companies that are coming online, selling more and more cars. That's a problem. But I do think Elon Musk, his core audience, when you think of who's the core audience for Tesla, the typical electric car buyer, it's like a middle-class person, often somebody left of center. It is not somebody for whom, edgy, meme lord antics on the internet is necessarily going to be a huge appeal. And I think we've seen this weird thing happen where Elon Musk, as he's gotten deeper in social media, has embraced this different persona, and it's not necessarily one that's going to be helpful for selling cars or operating a massive rocket company. And when I look at the causes, what I see is kind of similar to what a lot of people go through. People will probably be going through this at their Thanksgiving table, right? You spend a lot of time on the internet, and sometimes people go down rabbit holes. And when you look at Elon Musk's mentions, his replies, who he's been talking to a lot of people on the far right. And I think this is kind of the result.
And Max, we had a story run about different investors different Tesla investors speaking against what Musk had tweeted. He's the biggest holder of the stock. It's in pretty much every major index. Was yesterday's move a reaction because, as you mentioned, the concern that maybe consumers won't be buying the cars, or is that investors getting out of it? Like, how is there a read across from what he says and does on X to the one public company that he is in charge of?
It's very hard to know. And I should say this, like, Elon Musk does controversial stuff on the internet all the time, and sometimes the stock goes up. It doesn't always, there isn't always a one-to-one, he says something weird and investors sell. I think you have both going on, right? You have the worries about demand, and then you have some investors. Now, this is not a huge part of the company's investor base yet. The people who are speaking out, although it is some like really prominent bulls, Ross Gerber, one of the first investors to kind of put out a statement, has been like one of the big promoters of the stock. So losing him is a big deal. But we haven't seen, the big holders of the stock do anything. And in fact, a bunch of these hedge fund managers like Bill Ackman, who spent a lot of time a couple weeks ago, calling out Harvard undergraduates for, for what they perceived as anti-Semitism. Haven't said anything yet, and many lots of powerful people in Silicon Valley have not said anything yet. So we shall see. I think the White House statement and the news that Apple is pausing, both of those will be significant and could lead to further pullbacks. Although we're not seeing the stock today, I should say.
Yeah, and I mean, these things, it'll take time to play out for sure. Max, really appreciate your joining us today. Max Chafkin is a writer for Bloomberg Business Week, and of course, he mentioned the Elon Inc. podcast. You can find that, and you can subscribe to it on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and of course, the Bloomberg Terminal. Bailey, there are some breaking news here. There's a redhead, and of course, in Bloomberg parlance, that means you got to pay attention to this right now. Sam Altman is leaving OpenAI. He is departing this enterprise, and now the chief technology officer, Mira Murati, has been appointed the interim CEO. So Sam Altman, who's kind of, really intimately tied to OpenAI, the company that Microsoft is invested in, saying goodbye.
Interesting timing, too, where we're talking about figures who are the driving force behind the company. So Sea Change, this has been one of the many companies on the IPO beat. People have been questioning, will they or won't they go public in 2024? Is this a sign with a permanent successor? Will be interesting to see.
Oh, that's a really great point. Yeah, does this set up the company to go public? And if so, I mean, 2024 might be the timeline here that people were looking at. Has not been a good year for IPOs, 2023.
Not at all.
All right, this is something we'll continue to monitor as the headlines cross. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news with Leslie Lotto in the Bloomberg 1130 newsroom in New York City. Leslie.
Thank you, Scarlett. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter is in hospice care at home. The 96-year-old is with her hubby. Former President Jimmy Carter in Plains, Georgia. The Carter family had announced earlier this year that Rosalind had dementia. The former president, who turned 99 last month, entered hospice care at home in February. President Biden has reportedly spoken to the ruler of Qatar, which has been a mediator in hostage talks with Hamas about the latest push to get more prisoners in Gaza released. Israel says it's allowing 2 diesel tankers into Gaza a day to support the water and sewer system, and said there's no shortage of food in the territory. Charges have been filed against a man in the death of a Jewish protester in California. Ventura County District Attorney Eric Nasarenko said in a filing that involuntary manslaughter and battery charges against 50-year-old Loe Al-Najib prosecutors relied on new physical and forensic evidence against him.
In addition, we were able to take video as well as digital footage, put it together, and establish a clear sequence of events leading up to the confrontation.
Earlier this month, at a pro-Palestinian protest in Thousand Oaks, 69-year-old Paul Kessler was allegedly hit with a bullhorn during an argument, fell to the ground, and hit his head on the pavement. He died a short time later, that is. A welcome break at the pump and grocer for your holiday. Consumer price analysis by Alliant Credit shows turkey prices and gas prices are down, but don't do that happy dance quite yet, as it might be offset by rising costs in other areas. Global News 24 hours a day, powered by 2,700 journalists. You can get it whenever you want it on Bloomberg News.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Not a great deal of movement in the major stock averages as we approach the close of regular trading today. S&P 500, in fact, barely budging. It does remain above the 4,500 mark. And as far as volume, it's about 12% below the 30-day average this time of day. Amazon, among the leaders in terms of index points, that was up just about 1.4%. And then you have Ross Stores, the best performing stock in the index. This is the discount retailer. That was up something like 9% after results there. Of the 471 companies in the S&P 500 that have reported earnings so far, 82% have delivered positive earnings surprises. Mohammed El-Arian of Queens College, Cambridge, says investors have almost universally latched onto a new narrative.
The market has now fully embraced, not just that the Fed has finished its hiking cycle, which I think is correct, but that we're going to see deeper and deeper cuts next year without a recession. And that's the critical assumption that's now built in across markets.
Right now, the S&P 500 just up a hair's breadth, 4508 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, that has just turned lower, down 33 points. The NASDAQ 100 down 11 points. The Russell 2000 is up 1.2%. As far as yields, let's go with the 2-year. That is at 490 right now. That's up 6 basis points. And just to recap, one of the stories that Scarlett brought you, Sam Altman departing OpenAI, and it looks like he got canned. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the Drive to the Close, and today joining us is Sylvia Jablonski. She's CEO and CIO at Defiance ETFs. I'm Scarlett Fu, here with Bailey Lipschultz. Sylvia, great to have you on. As much as there's little action in the indexes today, we do see stock indexes firmly higher for the week. So the November rally, fear not, is intact. The S&P 500 remains above 4,500, but the pace of gains has definitely slowed compared with, let's say, 2.5 weeks ago. Treasury yields, for a change, are a little changed. Sylvia, have we gone from oversold to overbought, and we're just kind of stuck waiting for a new catalyst now?
Hi, Scarlett. Good afternoon. I think that with any kind of, let's call it short-term epic rally like this, it's not unusual to to see a little bit of a pause in that. So I don't think that, we're necessarily in overbought. I do think that, we've transitioned closer to overbought than we were to oversold before because of the rally this week. But I think that stocks are just taking a breather, and, the story for a year-end rally, or at least sustaining what we've already got, maybe moving up a little bit more, remains intact. We have seasonal headwinds now. We have a strong consumer. As you said, the 10-year is little unchanged, but it's certainly changed, down from 5% in recent weeks. The Fed is kind of more stable, leaning on even dovish. And I think the market liked that in the short term. And I think that, that gives us some momentum in trading.
And Sylvia, we'll get some more data before the next Fed decision. What can change? And do you see the inflation data as potentially a one-off or a start of a really strong trend?
I don't think it's the start of a really strong trend necessarily. We might see another read or two that kind of stays in the same area. It might even be a little bit, hotter than this one was, but it's certainly very reassuring to have seen this inflation data number. When you kind of break it apart, some of the interesting points of it were reduced costs of healthcare and things like that. So, I think it depends. What is good is that the price of oil is lower. it looks like there's some ease across, the various inflation points, which is very good for consumers. But I think for the next couple of months, it's probably going to hover around where it is. Maybe it'll kind of drop down a little bit. I don't think that much will change the Fed's mind at this stage, unless it's a completely hot read out of left field. And, Fed Chair Powell did address that, right? In October, he seemed a little more dovish than he did in kind of the last meeting that we saw, where he almost said that, look, we're open to head fakes. And if there are head fakes, have no doubt that we too will head fake. So, I think that'll be interesting to see.
It's worth mentioning here that Microsoft shares are down, and if you look at an intraday chart, the stock did start losing ground right around the time, Bailey, that we broke the news that Sam Altman is departing OpenAI after losing the confidence of the board. Again, Sam Altman, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, one of those prominent figures in the AI industry, leaving OpenAI. The chief technology officer will come in and become the interim CEO. I bring this up, Sylvia, because Microsoft is one of the stocks that you say is really a leader among the tech firms, in part because of that OpenAI investment. How much of that is priced in, do you think?
Yeah, I do think so. So the news is pretty interesting, right? And it's not surprising to see that the stock maybe fell off a little bit. I mean, today, kind of the Magnificent Seven have all done the same, but we'll have to see how that impacts the stock and what his role was in terms of like their allegiance with OpenAI. I think it's a huge part of Microsoft's success, and I do think that OpenAI is priced in. But what isn't priced in is the other stuff they're doing. They're kind of forever been talking about their own AI chips. We'll see where that goes. If you look at cloud growth, the last earnings season, if Amazon cloud grew 12%, Azure grew 26%. So they're starting to see like a faster growth rate, even though they're not the biggest cloud provider. 365 Copilot is another AI solution, and 40% of S&P 500 stocks actually subscribe to that already, and they're picking up steam and momentum there. And then you actually just have like the desktop upgrades and conversions, which we haven't really seen since COVID. So I think that either way, Microsoft is going to be fine, and there's a lot of reasons why that stock can continue to grow. Quality stock, it's just been on a tear lately, and I do think that they're going to play a huge role in AI. They've already sort of proved that, and I think this news will probably be a short-term dent in the stock and probably move forward with innovation.
Mm-hmm. Sticking on that theme, another stock you like is NVIDIA, up 236% this year. Earnings on Tuesday. How high is the bar?
The bar is pretty high. I think some of the areas that we're going to be looking at is, kind of what their growth is, right? I think they talked about 171% in just one segment, data center, last time around. So we'll see, kind of where that number lands now. We know that they've been talking about $1 trillion of data center conversions that have to happen. We'll have to see, how much of that $1 trillion is starting to be captured in the near term there. I think the bar is set really high, but I also think that NVIDIA is, hands down the leader in AI, the leader in chips. They own about 90% of the GPU market. So it'll be, kind of really interesting to see if the forward-looking guidance is similar to what it was last time around. And the good thing about this is that Jensen Huang has actually given us, kind of concrete data of what they see for forward-looking demand. So I think the question is sort of, does he get that demand that he's been, kind of publicly sharing? If he does, then it's, the stock can move a little further and off to the races.
Yeah, but if you missed the boat on NVIDIA, and so many people did, the other way to play it, you point out, Sylvia, is to look at the runner-up here, and that might just be advanced micro devices. And when I say runner-up, that's kind of a generous way to put it, because at most it makes up, 10% of the market share for the GPU market?
Yeah, 10% of the GPU market and growing, right? And Lisa Su's just been, I think, a really great transformative leader for that company. She kind of comes out of, they might have a slow quarter or two, and then she comes out of left field and just, crushes it with numbers. Her projected outlook, I think, was about 9% revenue growth going forward. They're seeing, some pickup in gaming, some of the chips that they have in things like Xboxes, and they have, kind of the leadership in electric vehicles. They're in Tesla vehicles, for example. So I do think that, it's a lot cheaper in terms of purchase price for the investor, and it's another way to play AI.
All right, Sylvia, really appreciate your joining us. Sylvia Jablonski, of course, is with Defiance ETFs. She is the CEO and CIO at the firm. We appreciate your joining us for our drive to the close. We are looking at stock market indexes, little change, but for now, the S&P 500 might just close out with a fourth straight day of gains. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with some of the company stories we're following. Let's start with Microsoft. Those shares down about 1.9%. This move comes up after word that Sam Altman, one of the most prominent figures in artificial intelligence, is leaving OpenAI. Now, the company says in a statement the board no longer has confidence in his ability to continue leading OpenAI. OpenAI is Microsoft's AI partner, thus the decline in Microsoft shares. OpenAI, leading player in AI, it's been in talks to sell employee shares to investors at a valuation of about $86 billion. That's a figure that would make the company one of the largest startups in the world. And fallout from that Elon Musk post endorsing anti-Semitic views that continues to spread. According to Axios, Apple is going to pause advertising on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Earlier, we heard that Lionsgate Entertainment also suspended all advertising on X. That's effective immediately. Musk's post has also prompted a rebuke from the White House and criticism as well from Tesla investors. And the criminal ransomware gang behind the recent attack on the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China has claimed responsibility for 2 more hacks on U.S. financial firms. The Lockbit gang added the Chicago Trading Company and Alphadyne Asset Management this week to a list of victims on its dark web page. And those are the company stories we're following at this hour. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Scarlett Fu and Bailey Lipschultz here with you in place of Carol and Tim on this Friday. And Bailey, there's a great story on the Bloomberg which caught my attention and caught our readers' attention as well about banks. Of course, they've turned to AI for derivatives trading and fraud detection, but now they may turn to AI to help write performance reviews. Now you have a new person or a new thing to blame, I guess.
I find it hilarious, but it also makes sense, Scarlett. I feel like anytime I talk to a manager at Bloomberg, the first thing they complain about in terms of their role is eval season. And the need to write evals, review evals.
The time it takes.
Exactly. According to Workday, this is another area that AI can be utilized. And they call out that if you have 100 employees and it takes 7 hours to write a job description, that's 700 hours. You throw that bad boy into an AI system and it pumps it out for you.
Did they write the one for Sam Altman? Performance review?
That was John Tucker. And of course, John, you're referring to Sam Altman being out at OpenAI. And of course, he's one of the pioneers of the AI industry. And apparently the board of directors has lost confidence in Sam Altman's ability to lead. Microsoft shares are lower as a result. I don't know. Is that a vote of confidence for AI, or is that a reason to be worried about AI, Bailey?
Well, I'm looking at the share reaction. I know you mentioned Microsoft down. We also saw NVIDIA tick down a little bit lower as well. So does this throw any type of concern into what happens? But as we talked about, the way that release was written, it's very confusing actually what led to him getting the boot other than seemingly not talking to and is being as clear as possible with its board. But again, you look at an entire industry and area that has captivated Wall Street for going on a year at this point about the idea of how AI can be utilized. So what does this mean is something I think we're going to continue to be talking about and continue to be seeing it play out from a stocks perspective.
I think we should put this into the ChatGPT and see how they interpret it. Mr. Altman's departure follows a deliberative review process by the board, which concluded that he was not consistently candid in his communications with the board, hindering its ability to exercise its responsibilities.
Yikes. I don't know what that means.
What would ChatGPT say about that?
I wish I could plug it.
That sounds like it was written by ChatGPT, doesn't it?
I will say, as I mentioned, the one thing that does stand out to me is that the chairman of the board, Greg Brockman, will also be stepping down, remaining at the company, but that does seem like maybe another friction point for the company.
Yeah, the CTO, Mira Murati, will be serving as the interim CEO of OpenAI. Bloomberg's Beyond the Bell starts right now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Katie Greifeld. We're counting you down to the closing bell. You're here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our friends Scarlett Fu and Bailey Lipschultz in today for Tim Stenevec and Carol Masser. Welcome to our audiences in full across all of our Bloomberg platforms on a day where equities once again, Scarlett, are in the green on the day and on the week.
Yeah, the path of least resistance is for stocks to move higher, or in the case of the last few days, inch higher at this point. There was a little bit of wobbling. We saw Microsoft shares extend their losses on that OpenAI headline, but it does look like a fourth straight day of gains here for the S&P 500.
Yeah, absolutely here. And we should just reiterate that OpenAI headline, of course, with Sam Altman basically being forced out. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Rachel Metz reporting that the board had undertaken a review process of, I guess, something, and they basically determined that they weren't confident going forward here in leaving him at the helm of that company.
We concluded that ChatGPT might have written the press release because it was kind of hard to understand.
I don't know. It was a little bit brutal. You read through the lines there, and again, it made it just very clear that this wasn't Sam Altman's decision. Really interesting to think about the ripple effects here. Obviously, Microsoft being one of them, but you think about the Fortune 500 companies, 90% of them are building on OpenAI, so it's a very systemically important company as well.
And this was someone who was very much at the forefront of AI and talking to politicians about what this application could actually do. So I'm also interested to see what this means in the entire AI community with Sam Altman getting the boot at his company.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should point out we don't have a lot of details about exactly what the board took issue with, but I think as Bailey alluded to here, I think everyone wants to know whether it dovetails at all with the rest of the AI space, or this is something very specific to OpenAI and ChatGPT. We get the closing bells here in New York. Green all around the screen, though we should point out the gains are relatively modest. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up by about 2 points as we wait for the numbers to settle. That's going to be good enough to push it into the green, but we're talking about a tenth of a percent gain on the day. The S&P 500 up for a second week, up today about a tenth of a percent or about 5 to 6 points, while the NASDAQ is higher by about 12 points or a tenth of a percent. But let's talk about the Russell 2000, Scarlett, here. A 1.3% gain on the day, more outperformance relative to the broader market. And I was just taking a look on a weekly basis. The Russell 2000 outperforming the S&P 500 on a weekly basis by more than 3 percentage points. That's the widest margin to the upside for the Russell versus the S&P going back to early 2022.
Yeah, something to definitely watch for. I'm looking at the S&P 500 right now, and you have 328 stocks higher, 171 down. So clearly the tilting is to the upside.
And you take a look at how it breaks down on the industry group level. You do have more green than red, but again, it was a pretty quiet day in the markets. But energy up at the top, up by more than 2%. We know that crude oil bouncing back a little bit right now. 4 straight weeks of losses, though, entering a bear market yesterday, but bouncing around right now. Retail also having a good day. Transportation and banks as well. Then you go down the list. What's not doing well? Media and entertainment, household products, and then software and services leading the rear, down by about 0.9%.
And before, Scarlett, you get into some of the movers, I just want to correct myself. I did say that the S&P 500 had gained for a second straight week. It is indeed a third straight week of gains on the S&P, Scarlett.
All right, let's take a look at some of those retailers that Katie highlighted. We'll start with Gap, GPS, rallying the most since June of 2020, up more than 30% to $17.85. Its first full quarter under the new CEO, Richard Dixon, seems to be one that investors like because it reported better than expected third quarter results. Comp sales at Old Navy unexpectedly rising. So that was a little bit of a surprise given that Athleta is really the growth engine of Gap, but that didn't happen this past quarter. Gap, though, is a shadow of its former self with sales contracting in 6 of the last 8 quarters
When was the last
overall.
time you've been in a Gap, Scarlett?
I have not been in one in forever because the one that is across the street or was across the street from the Bloomberg offices closed during the pandemic, and I haven't been in one since.
Yeah,
So did the Banana Republic. I love Banana Republic.
Yes, exactly. Part of the Gap empire or former empire. Another big gainer of the day was Ross Stores, the best performer in the S&P 500. You could see they're closing better than 7%, touching the high since May of 2021. It had a beat and raise quarter. It did strike a cautious tone for this quarter, which is fairly consistent with what we've heard from a lot of retailers, including Walmart. But analysts still say that off-price is a very strong segment and will continue to gain market share from department stores and specialty retailers. Anyone go to Ross Stores here?
No, I mean, it's been a while since I've been in. I mean, I did go to one like way back when, and it just wasn't really my bag, but I see the appeal.
You're not a treasure hunter?
I am not, no, not at all. My wife goes to like TJ Maxx every other day, I feel like. So, she brought home like this pot the other day. I was like, we don't need another pot. She's like, but it was on sale. I was like, everything's on
Everything's
sale.
on sale.
Can't argue
there.
with that.
Yeah. All right, let me just round up the last gainer here. It's Expedia after Evercore upgraded the stock to outperform. An analyst there says the stock is at a fundamental inflection point with revenue growth set to accelerate next year and margins set to expand. By the way, Expedia is already up 48% so far this year, today ending up higher by 5%.
I just want to point out that Ross Stores is more than 7 times the size of Gap. So when you're thinking about retailers that matter, keep that in mind.
That's great context.
But in a week that, as Romaine mentioned, third weekly gain for the S&P 500, a number of underperformers. Worst performer in the S&P was Applied Materials, dropping 4%. This coming after a report that a U.S. criminal investigation for allegedly violating export restrictions to China. So it bounced back from those lows, but the impact of that probe overshadowing earnings that really beat analyst expectations across the board, gave a strong guidance. Stock still up more than 50% year to date, but a big lag for Applied Materials on a day that, for the most part, you saw semiconductor stocks trading higher. Among the worst performers, also in the S&P 500, Bath & Body Works, guys. This is a company that had a lot of pull it forward in demand during COVID. Right now, dropping more than 3% after third quarter sales decline. Warning revenues also going to drop year over year in the fourth quarter. Analysts calling out consumer spending slowing and how they're showing greater pressure into the year end. And again, that coming after 2 years where everyone was doing something to get their hands on soap.
On soap. Just before we move on to what's happening in the yield space on the day and on the week, Bailey, I do want to go back to that OpenAI story with Sam Altman being removed by the board as CEO. Microsoft, of course, the primary investor in this company, out with a statement saying that it stands behind OpenAI, that it is committed to the company, and that it has a long-term partnership with the company. That's all we know right now. Once again, the headline that we broke just a little while ago is that Sam Altman out as CEO of the company that he co-founded, and his co-founder, Greg Brockman, who was chairman of the board, has been also stepped down from the board, though he is still going to remain with the company. I do want to go back to what happened in the yield space because it was another wild day here. We talk about, I guess, that relentless rally, and it continued here. It was a mixed bag on the day here. You see the yield on the 2-year yield up about 6 basis points, basically the 10-year unchanged on the day. But on a weekly basis here, we're talking about drops in the double digits in terms of basis points, about 17 lower on the 30-year yield, 21 basis points lower on the week for the 10-year yield.
And I know that we've seen a huge rally when it comes to the bond market, particularly, of course, all eyes on the benchmark 10-year yield. But I think some perspective is important here. I mean, you think about where we entered the year, it was a heck of a lot lower, below 4% right now. Of course, we got below 350 earlier this year. So the fact that we're still meaningfully above 4%, you think about what that means for some of the businesses out there who are facing their maturity walls, refinancing risks, et cetera, that have to tap the bond market, that don't have a choice, and that's painful.
It is painful, but there's a lot more interest rate volatility to come given what we've seen. I'm excited about what's to come next week because the poster child of AI.
It's a holiday shortened week.
It's a holiday shortened week, but also AI poster child NVIDIA will be reporting results.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting week, too, because we also talk, I mean, we should also point out this is typically a low volume week, obviously, because of the Thursday being a holiday and then everyone taking off Friday. So I do wonder what the market reaction is going to be to a stock that is already, you know, up 200 and something percent. And like, what can they say, Scarlett, that's really going to like provide an upward catalyst?
Another 3-digit % increase in sales, maybe?
Yeah. They're buying OpenAI? I don't know. something crazy? I don't know.
Guys, I just want to point out that the NASDAQ is about 3 points off of its year highs. So as you mentioned, Romaine, NVIDIA is the fourth largest holder, or the fourth largest member of the NASDAQ 100. Granted, they beat earning or revenue by 20% last quarter and moved 0.1%. Yeah. But if this company gets moving higher, we are going to have 52-week highs going into the holiday.
Yeah, it's certainly the leader in this market. I mean, hands down. So it'll be interesting to see how much juice it's got left. I should point out, too, we get a lot of other earnings, including from some of the retailers like Nordstrom, Abercrombie & Fitch, Urban Outfitters, as well as some other tech companies like HP Inc., as well as Autodesk.
Yeah, all those specialty retailers who are going to be losing market share to Ross Stores and TJX, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, but then you saw the Macy's results, and I do wonder, I mean, are department stores still kind of just, I mean, I don't want to say they're back, but are they maybe, did we sort of call their death maybe a little bit too prematurely?
I mean, people go there, they check out the displays, they look at the holiday decorations.
They do the perfume samples, you know, speaking for myself.
Is that what you do for you every night you go out?
Just smells great, yeah.
They hang out with the personal shopper, you know.
You're supposed to actually buy something, Katie, after they spray it on you.
No, absolutely not.
You just move on.
That's what I use Amazon for.
You take a picture of it and then you go home.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I mean, those are the big events next week, right? I don't know, Scarlett. I mean, I know you love Fed speak, but I think the Fed members, I hope, are on vacation next week.
Yeah, I think they could take a break.
Yeah.
I think we'll be okay. I think we know what they're going to say anyway.
Yeah. Take a beat, yeah.
Take a beat. All right, guys, that does it for us. Our cross-platform coverage of the market close on Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube. We'll be back on Monday at the same time, same place.
Imagine how the world could be so very fine, so happy together.
Bailey, did you know that we had APEC this week?
I think I heard that. I did see Janet Yellen at an In-N-Out, according to Twitter, or X, I guess. I'm really interested what her order was.
Someone posted this on X.
Someone
really?
posted a photo of Janet Yellen ordering at In-N-Out.
Actually, that's really good. I got to go find that one. We want to bring in someone who knows quite a bit about APEC and, of course, is a longtime China watcher. He is Andy Brown, a partner at Brunswick Group. He heads up Brunswick's China Hub, which means he works closely with his colleagues in China and globally to lead up the firm's geopolitical practice to advise clients on China-related issues. And he's going to help us recap what happened at APEC because, Andy, you had the long-anticipated high-stakes summit meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping, and it did yield some big wins, right? There's going to be military-to-military communications. There's going to be pandas.
Right, exactly. Some people have called APEC a meeting that occurred on the sidelines of the Biden-Xi summit, and I think there's quite a bit of truth to that. Yeah, look, it was a successful meeting, as far as I can tell. It was successful because it happened.
Yeah, and they agreed to talk?
They agreed to talk. It was successful against a very low base of expectation. It was successful because nothing terrible happened, if you don't count Joe Biden yet again calling Xi Jinping a dictator.
Yeah.
And Anthony Blinken looking terribly pained at the reference. But look, I think it was successful because it just seemed so normal. You know, you had two leaders and they sat down and they across a table and they were flanked by their aides and they had a substantial conversation and a nice walk in the garden, and Xi Jinping met a bunch of CEOs, and as normal they sort of sucked up to him and gave him a round of a standing ovation, and Xi Jinping cracked a smile, actually a big grin, when Gavin Newsom handed him a Golden State Warriors
so that's
jersey.
Not normal.
Well, that's not normal. That's not normal. That's beyond normal. And look, you know, you've got to measure that against the beginning of this year when it was anything but normal, when it was extremely abnormal. And in fact, earlier this year, people were talking about war.
Well, we have two wars going on and the uncertainty around that, but I'm wondering what the messaging from this summit could mean for investors wanting to get back into China, because we saw Alibaba pulling back their plan to separate their cloud unit because of the restrictions from the U.S. shipping AI or chips to China.
Yeah, I don't actually think that was the point of the meeting was to get anything substantial, frankly, on anything. Mm-hmm. The point of this meeting was just to get these two sides together again. And there has been a dangerous absence of dialogue, even as military tensions build, even as you have war in Ukraine, you have war in Gaza, and you have all kinds of tripwires, flashpoints around Asia, Chinese, Filipino ships standing off in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
It's important that these two leaders get together. And frankly, I thought one of the more important agreements, we had an agreement for military to resume military exchanges. We had an agreement on fentanyl. I thought maybe one of the most important was agreement to get more flights going between the United States and China. You know, you've got to remember, in all the sort of myriad ways that Chinese and Americans have met over the years, whether that's in conference rooms or in sports stadiums or hotels or airplanes, all of that has been frozen, and in a world that is becoming incredibly tense.
So things really took a turn for the worse when former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a trip to Taiwan, basically sticking a finger in Beijing's eye. Have all the different measures that have been piled on been rolled back following that?
No. Well, they're talking. So first of all, in the aftermath of that was the August visit, and then you had China firing ballistic missiles over Taiwan, halted all negotiations, all talks about anything. We haven't wound back. I mean, we're not going back to where we were before. The U.S. position is basically, this is a fundamentally competitive relationship, but we've got to make it work. frenemies. We got to make it work because we got a big trade relationship, investment relationship, and we've got a lot of people-to-people contact, and we have a lot of problems in the world that need solving, not least climate change, pandemics, narcotics trafficking, and so on. That's the U.S. position, and it seems to me to be a pretty sensible one that acknowledges the tensions in the relationship, but says we've got to manage them somehow.
We're talking to Andy Brown, partner at Brunswick Group, former editorial director of the Bloomberg New Economic Forum. So glad to have you back in studio. But Andy, one thing that's come up on a couple conversations I've had is that some investors view the current geopolitical landscape as the most uncertain since the aftermath of 2001, or aftermath of 9/11, given everything going on in Gaza, in Ukraine, uncertainty around China and Taiwan. What do you make of that potential argument, and did this summit have any impact on your view?
Well, to the extent that geopolitics drives business today, and it really does, the fact that you've had this sort of timeout, the fact that you have two presidents who are now talking has at least cleared some of the uncertainty. So earlier this year, CEOs were worried about worst case scenarios, right? So you had boardrooms looking at trying to weigh the probability of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And you had senior Pentagon figures coming out to say, yep, we can see inside Xi Jinping's mind he's going to go in before 2027. You had the head of the Navy saying it could be 2024. In fact, it could be any time at all. And so this has been a big deterrent to long-term investment in China. The geopolitics of Taiwan, the geopolitics of the South China Sea, on top of a lot of very hostile regulation in China around data, around national security, anti-espionage. You had Chinese police raids on the Minsk Group, on Bain, and so on. And all together, you wrap it all up, and CEOs have been concerned, frankly, about their personal safety in China. Issues about whether they should go or not. And if they go, should they wipe their laptops? Yes, or leave them at home, even better.
I got to ask you, since you bring up Taiwan and how big of an issue it is, the opposition parties in Taiwan have agreed to join forces ahead of the critical presidential election next year. That increases the odds slightly that you might get a more pro-China government in Taiwan elected next year. What does that do to any kind of timeline that people are putting out there about a possible Chinese attempt to unify with Taiwan?
Right, so these timelines were all extremely speculative to start with. I mean, really the only date we have is that Xi Jinping has told the People's Liberation Army it should be ready by 2027. So actually, I think this is a big deal. It wasn't so long ago that William Lai of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party was a shoo-in, all right? And he has a history of fairly strong support for a pro-independence position. And now you have the opposition agreeing to unite behind a single ticket, and they will have a series of internal, external polls to see who that should be, all brokered by former President Ma Ying-jeou. And China would, now I don't know whether that, to what extent that changes the game, but it certainly does make the likelihood of a William Lai presidency so much less.
And that would be good news for anyone looking for calm in the South China Sea. Andy Brown, really appreciate your joining us. Andy Brown is partner with the Brunswick Group, former editorial director of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Not a lot of movement today. S&P 500 ended the session up 5.7, well, let's call it 6 points, up 1/10%, ending the session above 4,500, 45.14, gaining for a third straight week, in fact. So far this November, we've seen a $2.7 trillion rally in stocks. And some of the individual shares on the move, Microsoft shares, they fell close to 2%. The move comes after word that Sam Altman is leaving OpenAI. The company said in a statement that board no longer had confidence in him. He got fired, it's safe to say. OpenAI is Microsoft's AI partner. That's why Microsoft shares were lower. Amazon cutting hundreds of employees in the division responsible for its voice-activated Alexa assistant. And then Citigroup is going to start a round of job cuts as soon as Monday. That's part of their sweeping reorganization, according to our sources. Again, the S&P 500 was up close to 6 points, 45.14 on the index. The Dow ended the session up a whopping 1 point, and the NASDAQ 100 was 4 points higher. The Russell 2000, that's kind of where the action was today. That was up 1.3%. So the small caps doing rather well. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Scarlett and Bailey.
Small caps outperforming for once. It's rare these days, Bailey.
Well, I'm going to say that's sort of a, am I correct in saying that's kind of a deflation play? Or disinflation?
It's a cyclical play.
Yeah, I remember, I wrote a story during the pandemic about mid-cap outperformance, and that's because they're not exposed to international companies. They're mainly focused on U.S. consumers. So small caps, I don't know. I'm going to be honest.
No one ever talks about mid-caps.
No, mid-caps matter. That was, I think, Kathy Larkin coined that when she was in charge of mid-caps.
Because they're not subject to the fluctuations of foreign buyers of their stuff. So, okay.
All strong dollar is good for them as opposed to strong dollar being bad.
And also the biggest mid caps are much bigger than the smallest big caps. Emily Grafeo had a story on that recently, which highlighted like companies like Deckers, which are considered mid cap, are much, much, much bigger than like the smallest big caps in the S&P 500.
Yeah, I'm always interested to see kind of how different investors are playing different kind of themes. So you have this week, it very much was a risk-on trade with the inflation data. So then you saw small caps have their best day in quite some time, and then that continued to follow through, whereas you've seen the Magnificent Seven, as we talk about far too often, continuing to dominate markets. But you could argue that if you pull up Magnificent Seven against a NASDAQ 100 or an S&P, they're kind of the same.
And just about every Wall Street analyst I heard today was saying that we are going to have a Santa Claus rally into year end. And I'm wondering, is that bullish or bearish when everybody's on board the same theme?
Everyone's reading the same note. That's what it is.
Maybe that's it.
No one has any good ideas.
ChatGPT.
Everyone heard that their evals are going to be dependent on what they do. So if you don't outperform, we need to speak a rally into existence.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We will check in with you later on. Bailey, you and I were talking earlier about Joe Biden and Xi Jinping's meeting in San Francisco, for all that it accomplished or didn't accomplish. There was one small victory, which is the likely return of panda bears to U.S. zoos. Earlier this month, the 3 panda bears at Washington, D.C.'s National Zoo were returned to China following the expiration of a 3-year contract with China's Wildlife Agency. So we want to bring in now Elena Songster. She is a professor at St. Mary's College of California. She is author of Panda Nation, which is a book about China's panda policy. Elena, good to speak with you. I am obsessed with panda bears because they're like giant children, but also because Beijing has long used these creatures as a way to curry favor, reward friends, and punish their enemies. What can you tell us about the significance of pandas to China?
So pandas are unique to China. They cannot be found anywhere else. And one thing that I find particularly interesting that I discovered in my research about pandas is that they are not connected with any of the more ancient kind of historical, cultural symbolism, and so they're really only become significant culturally for China in the 20th century.
Yeah, I'm really interested in who pays for these flights because they just sent back the pandas and now they're returning. Is that something that the Chinese government is funding? Are American taxpayers funding that?
That actually, I do not know. That's a good question. It must be wrapped into the exchange agreement in some way.
Yeah, these exchange agreements, it's interesting because when there are pandas from China coming to the U.S., they're not gifted to the U.S., they're on loan, and the U.S. actually has to pay for these pandas, right?
Correct.
According to a survey by Nikkei Asia, Bailey, zoos typically pay $1 million a year for a pair of panda bears.
Now, my question is, when the pandas come from China and they procreate in a U.S. zoo, is the baby panda a U.S. citizen? I got to check that.
No, says the expert.
The baby panda belongs to China. That's part of the agreement. And not only does the baby panda belong to China, but the U.S. zoos pay an additional fee when they have the privilege of having a baby panda.
Wow. So it costs you money to have a baby panda.
Yes, but you also make a lot of money when you have a baby panda.
The pros and cons. So if and when pandas come back, what does that rollout look like? Is it all at once? They just kind of deploy a bunch of planes with pandas eating and sleeping across the Atlantic?
Probably highly unlikely. I don't know, but I suspect that it will be another pair of pandas that will be of mateable age that would, it sounds like, go to the San Diego Zoo based on what Xi Jinping said this past week.
Yeah, which makes me wonder, why did they let the contract lapse and send back the National Zoo pandas? Is it because they're setting up for Xi Jinping to announce that they would resume the panda loans? Can you talk a little bit about how China has used pandas as a form of soft power?
Yeah, sure. So the most kind of monumental example of this, of course, is the 1972 gift to the United States that was offered during President Nixon's visit to China, which was monumental on many fronts, but mainly because the U.S. and China were enemy states at the time, and so this was really a top secret visit, and when it happened, it was a shock to a lot of people around the globe, and it really was an expression of this very high-profile expression of warming relations between these two countries. And then it came with this, because it came with this gift of pandas to the United States, that suddenly kind of imbued the pandas with all of this kind of intense symbolic meaning. And that was then repeated almost immediately when Japan normalized relations with China just months later, and then subsequently to several other countries. And so the first stage of panda diplomacy were these kind of high-profile gifts. But then that shifted to loans, in part because China was worried about giving away its pandas without a clear understanding of how many it had and how sustainable that process was. And so they switched to short-term loans. But these weren't very well structured. They weren't good for the individual pandas. The money wasn't necessarily going to the conservation of the wild population, and so it came under heavy criticism, and pressure came from animal experts that this had to stop. And so they brought that to a close in the early 1990s in the United States, though it continued in other places until the early 2000s. And a group of experts, along with Chinese scientists and officials, came together and created this long-term scientific loan for which San Diego was the first model, and that started in 1996. And as of 2007, I believe, all of the subsequent loans around the world are based on this model.
And we know about the Taylor Swift economy. Is there a panda economy if and when they return to San Diego? Well, like, how much revenue are we talking this potentially could drive?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is one of the reasons the pandas are so expensive to have for an institution. One of the reasons that the fee is $1 million a year usually is because prior to that, during the short-term loan phase, which occurred from 84 to 92, the institutions that were hosting these pandas, they were making all kinds of money, like millions of dollars a year, and or just within months, actually, because they only had them for a few months.
Yeah.
And so they were seen as like profiting off of these precious species. And so that was a violation of CITES, CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species.
Hey, real quick, before
So-
you go, Elena, if Bailey were to climb the fence at the zoo and jump in the cage with the pandas, would they tear his face off? I mean, they're cute, but I don't know anything about, are they violent or like cuddly little bears like we all think they are?
Yes.
Guess what? They tear his face
yes.
off? Because I'd like to see that.
So there have been actual instances of the situation you just described. An individual jumped into an enclosure in China and tried to hug a panda bear, and that person was mauled and ended up in the hospital. So that's a really bad idea and highly not recommended.
All right, don't do that.
Well, that's why I like red pandas, because they're not related to pandas.
Yeah. On the flip side, they're not aggressive in the same order as, say, a grizzly or a polar bear.
Okay.
All right, we'll leave it there. So that was
There we go.
the burning question.
John Tucker was dying to ask that question. Really appreciate your joining us. Elena Songster, the author of Panda Nation, also Associate Professor of History at St. Mary's College of California. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news with Leslie Lotto in the Bloomberg 1130 newsroom in New York City.
Thank you, Scarlett. This just into Bloomberg. There are reports of shots fired with multiple victims at a New Hampshire hospital. We will, of course, update you on Bloomberg Radio as this story develops. The UN says it's been forced to stop deliveries of food and other necessities to Gaza and has warned of the growing possibility of widespread starvation after internet and telephone services collapsed in the besieged enclave because of a lack of fuel. Israel announced earlier today that it will allow a couple of trucks filled with fuel a day into the besieged territory. About half of the United States public does not plan on getting an updated COVID-19 vaccine, as we hear here from our own Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
The survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation finds there is a lack of concern about getting sick from COVID. One reason why nearly half of respondents say they have no plans to get the shot. Another reason, partisanship. KFF says 80% of white Republicans don't expect to get the new vaccine. That's more than twice the number of white Democrats who say they won't, which leaves about 2 in 10 adults reporting that they have gotten the latest COVID-19 vaccine, and most of them are 65 years old and older, and Democrats. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Former First Lady Rosalind Carter, the wife of former President Jimmy Carter, is entering hospice care at her home. The Carter Center made the announcement today. The 96-year-old was diagnosed with dementia earlier this year and joins her 99-year-old husband, who's been receiving hospice care at home since February. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks saw some small moves after a $2.7 trillion rally for this November so far. The S&P 500 did trade above 4,500, notching its third straight week of gains. So that's the longest since July. S&P 500 closing the session up just about 6 points, up 0.1% at 4514. The Dow Jones Industrial Average saw a gain of we'll call it 2 points, to 34,947. The NASDAQ 100 was up 4. Small caps got a boost today with the Russell 2000. That was up about 1.4%. And the big news near the close was that Sam Altman, one of the most prominent figures in artificial intelligence, being forced out of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. That sent shares of Microsoft lower. Microsoft has pumped $10 billion into OpenAI, its AI partner. Meantime, back to stocks. Nadia Lovell at UBS. She remains bullish of equities at this point.
You know, the rally has been fast and furious, and we do recognize they could stall out, but we're taking a little bit more of a longer-term view in terms of into 2024, and we think that there are still good fundamental reasons for this market to trend modestly higher. When you think about it, you have earnings that are set to reaccelerate.
And Wall Street's fear gauge, the VIX, that was up at 1380, so not a lot of volatility. 2-year yield, that was at 489. That was 5 basis points lower. A raging debate continues here in the Bloomberg Newsroom as to whether the large black and white pandas are better or the little tiny pandas, the red pandas, which we have at the Central Park Zoo and at the Bronx Zoo here in New York City. And I must say, having seen them recently, they are mondo cute. I, in fact, prefer them over the big giant pandas that are apparently coming back to the United States.
As do I, and I like to think I won over Scarlet Fu with the videos that I sent over of red pandas eating grapes.
I'm glad to see that you're working really hard.
This is what happens during the commercial break. Exactly. Billy shares some red panda videos. And yeah, I have to say that these are pretty impressive, but I'm a fan of the black and white giant pandas.
But the red pandas, you say, are not technically
not
pandas.
Related to pandas.
They're like
They're more raccoon family.
Raccoons that get into your garbage.
Raccoons are kind of cute too, though, if you like take away the
yeah, not if you're a homeowner.
Stuff, yeah. Those
if
are
you're a homeowner,
downsides.
Raccoons are really a pain in the butt.
When you live in the suburbs, well, you'll find out because you recently moved. They get into your trash cans and make a mess of just about everything. But yeah, they're cute.
I do see a lot of woodchucks and deer. Those are the two animals that I encounter.
All right. Well, speaking of issues that homeowners face, or potential homeowners, we did get some data this morning. New U.S. home construction unexpectedly rose in October. That is a sign that builders continue to benefit from a limited supply in the resale market. I want to bring in Kate Kaminsky. She is the Chief Operating Officer of Walton Global, which is a privately owned land asset and real estate investment company with about $3.6 billion in assets. Kate joins us by Zoom from Scottsdale, Arizona. Kate, good to speak with you. Can you give us a sense of what the housing market in Scottsdale, Arizona, part of the Sun Belt, looks like versus the rest of the country?
Thanks for having me. I was hoping we were going to talk about pandas today.
Wait, are you a fan of red or black and white pandas?
I like the black and white ones too. But housing, how about those numbers today? Really excited to see the result. And I have to say that that is really consistent with what I was hearing last week. Was at a prominent real estate conference in New York City. We had everyone from the investment side of the business to home building to supply chain, all there. And sentiment in the room was high, so much higher than the same conference just a year ago. And I think that that's really representative of what we're seeing in these numbers that came out today, with over 13% increases in starts and permits.
Kate, what is driving the optimism? Is it just the pent-up demand for houses and the fact that there's not a ton of supply of non-new or existing homes?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a factor of that lock-in effect that we're seeing with existing home sales. Builders are really benefiting from rates being where they're at and people that are locked in, under 4%, not having a desire to sell at this point because of what the cost of moving into a new home would be. So builders are experiencing market share that is totally out of the norm and really benefiting from that.
Yeah, there's some data from a consulting firm called Zonda that indicates new homes now account for a third of available inventory versus the typical 10%. Is this is this now the new normal to have new homes account for a third of available inventory, or is this temporary?
I think that this is going to be here to stay for a little while because people are going to benefit from those rates that they're locked into for a while. So, there is a fundamental need for new housing supply, and the builders are the ones who are going to be able to provide that as we see, these historically low levels of resale inventory. I think that the builders are also going to continue to command market share because of what they're doing with their rate buy-down programs. They're getting people into homes at what continues to be kind of the level that consumers seem comfortable with, which is around that 5%. So we're seeing builders across the board really pushing these programs of buying down mortgage rates, which are sitting at 7.3% today, down to 5.5%, just below that, which is where you're seeing a lot of consumers comfortable.
And looking at what the rates environment is showing right now, baking in 3 Fed cuts for next year, what happens with the new home construction market in 2024 if, in fact, we do see rates continue to come down?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to escalate. I mean, all of the home builder stocks are up, and they're definitely looking to increase community count. Here at Walton, we're really focused on an earlier stage in the cycle as compared to the development or building side. We're buying land to feed to these builders that's really in the path of growth. And we're seeing an acceleration in the deals that we're putting under contract because these builders are really looking to secure that supply because they continue to see the demand. So we're seeing builders continue to build on spec because they're seeing that turnover in their inventory, and we're expecting that community count's going to continue to increase and that demand is not going to decline in the near term.
Kate, I look around New Jersey and I don't see any undeveloped land. Where are you guys putting money to work to and buying to sell to these home builders?
So we're really focused in the southern half of the U.S. We focus on your typical, market fundamentals such as jobs, people, so migration into a market, and we're looking to continue to expand where the builders are taking us, and that is we're really seeing in that Sunbelt region. And particular states continue to defy all odds like Texas and Florida with staggering new home starts within those markets.
We were talking about a story that was very well read on the Bloomberg today about how almost 40% of U.S. homeowners are mortgage-free, and the majority of these homeowners are retirement age, and a lot of them are basically cashing in on their homes in the Northeast and then selling those and going to buy homes in the Sun Belt. How does that distort this current housing market?
So, I think that from a new home building perspective, we're still seeing that, help the demand side because we're seeing a lot of active adult communities pop up within the states that I just mentioned. That continues to be a product that, they're really driving within each of those markets. And so I think even though you're going to maybe see some resale inventory creep up in those markets, you're going to see the demand for new homes within those Sunbelt areas, places looking for highly amenitized communities, which, tend to be a lot of your newer communities as compared to some, older single homes that aren't going to have those recreational facilities. And so we think that continues to be a great opportunity to expand market share.
Kate, really appreciate your joining us. Kate Kaminsky is Chief Operating Officer at Walton Global, joining us from Scottsdale, Arizona. This is Bloomberg. Catch
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with some of the company news we're following. Can't hit this one too hard. The big news near the close, Sam Altman, one of the most prominent figures in artificial intelligence, being fired for at OpenAI. The board there says he was not upfront with them. The company behind ChatGPT, Microsoft shares, they were sent lower as a result of that. Microsoft is its AI partner. And other news, banks, they've already turned to AI for derivatives trading and fraud detection. Now they want to use it for the annual review process. That's according to Workday, one of the world's largest providers of HR software. Now, the firm back in September rolled out a bevy of new products that rely on AI to write job descriptions or aid managers in writing up annual reviews of workers' performance. And then you have Jim Ratcliffe's, his bid for up to a 25% stake in Manchester United. That's going to give the English Premier League football club an equity value of roughly $5.5 billion. The UK billionaires offered about $33 a share for this stake in the famous old football club. That represents a 79% premium to the stock's Thursday closing price in New York. I can't call it. It's football club. No, it's soccer. Anyway, those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm John Tucker, and you're watching and listening to Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg.
Found. Let's bring in now Rachel Metz, the Bloomberg reporter who wrote about this. Rachel, what do we know about this exit of Sam Altman so far?
Well, we know that it was a surprise to many in the technology industry and in the tech investor community. A lot of people seemed pretty shocked that this has happened, and I think a lot of people are still waiting to learn a little bit more about what exactly it was that made the board of OpenAI decide to remove him, which is, in fact, what happened. He was made to leave.
Rachel, how far do these ripples go, just given he has really been the face of AI and meeting with the likes of President Prime Minister Rishi Sunak?
Yeah, I mean, I think these ripples could go pretty far out. There are a lot of people and companies that see him as very much the face of AI at this point in time. He helps make OpenAI into a leading technology company, and I think a lot of people see what happens.
You mentioned Mira Murati. She's the chief technology officer who then gets elevated to interim CEO. There's also Greg Brockman, who is stepping down as board chairman. What can you tell us about him?
And he has been its president. So he's going to leave the board post, but will still serve as president of OpenAI. Not quite clear yet what that signals. I think we're going to have to look into it a little further to figure out what's happening. And he told me that the board's decision to remove Altman for this Altman was obviously a force there, he said. But from what little we know at this moment, it doesn't mean that there's anything happening.
AI and the stock extended its losses when these headlines.
AI and remains committed to their team as we bring this next era of AI to our customers. And on that point of commitment, I mean, Microsoft, as recently as in the past few weeks, I mean, has shown very publicly its commitment to OpenAI. Satya Nadella was a surprise guest at OpenAI's Developer Day. He kind of jumped up on stage and hung out for a few minutes, really committed to being a partner with the company.
Yeah, good point. All right, well, Rachel, thank you so much for getting us up to date on the latest here with OpenAI and all kinds of questions about what Sam Altman's going to do next and when he's going to publicly speak about this.
And the thing that's interesting is BI analyst Mandeep Singh putting out a note because Bloomberg